Hello, everybody. Dobrý den. My name is Marta Bog. I'm very happy to see so many of you, especially given how hot this day is. And before we start, I just want to introduce Anna Pniowsky, the star of the film Light of My Life. An Oscar-winning actor and director, Casey Affleck, also the recipient of Karlovy Vary President's Award in 2017. Welcome back. So we're going to make sure that there is enough time for questions from the audience, but maybe I'm going to begin. You know, the film starts with a bedtime story, fairy tale of sorts, and I've heard that it also started this way for you, that many years ago you came up with that story for your own son. I think it was like 9 years ago or even more. And so would you mind telling us a bit about how this story became that film?
That's a good question. Yes, I started telling that story about some of the animals that were left behind that weren't chosen to go on Noah's Ark and how they had to survive. And I thought it was a pretty good story. I kind of liked that. And I wrote that as an animated film about those animals. It wasn't that good, and still a pretty good idea, I think, but nobody wanted to make it. But I thought it was a good story, and then I wrote the scene of a parent telling a kid that story, and from there I started to write other scenes that were just conversations between a parent and a kid, and that I had a sort of collection of those at first, and then I started to put together the story that became the film from there. So I suppose the first story, being about those animals that weren't chosen to go on Noah's Ark, is sort of about the survival of a species and about also about kind of culture and the qualities in people and animals that are valued or not valued and what we expect out of certain animals. And the stories about the other scenes that I wrote were about sort of trying to teach a child something, but so often I found that I was the one that was actually sort of learning something in the conversation. And I think that those two things became what the movie is. Yeah, that's how it started.
Yeah, and you mentioned those conversations that you have with a child, which makes for such a big part of that movie. So I wonder, what was your take on those scenes at first? Because the dialogues are just, you really take your time with those stories, with those very gentle exchanges between the two. Is it something that you enjoyed, having to do with those scenes, with this dialogue that just keeps on going?
Yeah, for sure. What makes those scenes so important, like the kind of slow ones, and is because it kind of shows the two characters, dad and a daughter, what they're like in their normal life. Oftentimes, you can't really see what people are like, just in like everyday life. I think this shows the relationship that they have between each other and like what they get from the story, and what he gets from telling the story, what I get from listening to the story.
And I think that we don't have any more time for the photographs, so I'd maybe ask for some last ones, and then we're going to proceed. And Casey, when you were looking for your actress for this film, what were you looking for when it comes to Rock? How did you see her, and maybe how did you talk about this character together?
Well, whatever I was looking for, I sort of just abandoned that when I found Anna, because I thought that she had that very kind of mysterious quality that makes somebody, makes you care about somebody on screen, and that was the most important thing, because if the audience didn't care about her character, then the movie would be really, really boring. So that was what I wanted, and when I found Anna, she was able to play a scene and also still maintain like some level of naturalism, and she could sort of do what was called for in the scene, but also still seem like herself in some way, or someone who was thinking and feeling things while she was speaking.
And I remember this film that you did when you were, I think, 12 years old, Lemon Sky with Kevin Bacon.
Yes.
But you did the podcast with Mark Maron, which is like one of the funniest people on the planet. And you told him this story about your very first experience, acting experience, when you played a lion. Would you mind telling us about that? Because that was very early on too.
Yeah, that's funny. Yes, I was in kindergarten. My school was named after Rosa Parks, who is a woman who did something extraordinary in the civil rights movement, and we named our school after her. And she came to our school just because we were honoring her, and they put on a play for her. And I don't know what the play was, but I was a lion. And my mane fell off in the play, and I sort of froze. I didn't know what to do with myself because my whole costume had come off, and so I just went out and did my line anyway, which is to go roar, and then I went back and picked up my mane, and I went on, and afterward we got to meet Rosa Parks, and she sort of came down the line, and she got to me and she patted me on the head and she said, "Oh, I liked your roar." So you
started by roaring for Rosa Parks.
Yes, yeah, I know. I've been chasing that feeling ever since. And when I was 12 years old, I did a part in Lemon Sky because it was something that PBS was doing, and they were filming in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I grew up. And it just so happened that my mother was good friends with the person who was making it, and they needed a little kid, so they just put me in it. But I wasn't I didn't act a lot when I was a kid, and I wasn't something I was very interested in. It just was sort of luck.
And we talked a little bit earlier about your previous experiences and you having done a horror movie where there's also this sense of threat that you feel all the time. Of course, it's a quite different story, but did it help in a way? Because here, it's kind of hard to watch that, you're always on a run. It's like those rare moments when your characters can relax. It's just like maybe few minutes, few days, and then it's back again. So was it helpful for you that you kind of had that before to a certain extent?
Partially, yeah. It did help, get that sort of adrenaline. But the thing is, this movie is, I find it different than almost every other thing I've been in, because I think it really focuses on, the relationship that they have. And I think that helped me more because, when you have something, you really don't want to lose it. And I think that's important when, I'm threatened. But yeah, it did help, that was like my first kind of role that I had. And then this movie was my kind of, I don't know what to say, start. So I think that I learned a lot from this film. I've changed because of this film, like so much. Like basically the way I act is because of working with Casey. So yeah.
And you just introduced the film 2 hours ago, and at the very beginning you said that it's so much of this film is based on your experience as a parent. And it made me realize, I even remember this novel, The World According to Garp, with this man just being petrified the moment he becomes a father, because it seems that the whole world is out to get his child. So I guess every parent can understand this movie. Of course, the circumstances become more extreme. So when did you decide to, talk about this parent and caring for the child, but in this universe that's, that's just so threatening, so much more?
Yeah, I didn't set out to do that. I didn't sort of think I was going to make a movie with some science fiction conceit, or that would be a kind of have the kind of violence and the sort of the few moments that are kind of thrilling in the movie. But So in the way that like sometimes, at least for me, the writing process is something where you sort of learn what you're doing while you're doing it. I started to write it, and I realized that part of the experience that I was writing about was one that, like John Irving, got at so well, which is that you sort of feel like everything, you go into like a shopping mall, and instead of it just seeming like a shopping mall, it just seems like a place full of kidnappers, or like a maze where your kid's going to get lost, depending on the age of your kid. So if you're sort of paranoid in that way.
I have that, and I don't have kids.
Right,
so.
yeah. So that's kind of, as I was writing, I was sort of thinking about what would make stakes the highest, and in this world where, how can I make the world a place where it's very dangerous? The whole world is a total threat for her. That's sort of what I started to think about at the time. But it wasn't the plan all along.
And it's funny how even though you talk about the world without women or almost no women left, it's kind of like the most female-centered movie that you've been involved in many ways, even as an actor. And where did this idea even come from, that all of a sudden they're just not there? And what did you think of it also, that you're just this maybe one remaining girl in the world?
Which one first? Whichever one. Okay. That's a hard question. It's kind of I don't know how to describe it, like kind of eye-opening, where things can happen, and it kind of gives you an idea of what the world would be like without women, and it's kind of scary. Like, what if something like that actually happens, And it makes you wonder if, you yourself would end up in this scenario. So, it definitely is interesting how much any person can affect the world, especially women. They're nurturers, and I think that it's important that they're here, and I think that's partially what this movie is about.
Yeah, that's a good answer, and I feel like I started writing it about a father and a son, and I told that to my kids, both of them, and they felt like I was writing a movie about them, and they did not want that. They thought they'd be embarrassed by it, and they made me promise that I would not write a story about them. So then I changed it to a girl, thinking, it was really just about a parenting relationship, and it wouldn't make any difference. And I sort of based it on my niece a little bit, some of the personality traits that were written into the script. When Anna came along, the personality just sort of blossomed into whatever she was making it. But at first, the sort of constant reading, a lot of the sort of questioning, the engine that was driving those scenes was her personality in some way, pushing up against Dad all the time, creates that conflict. And a parent who's trying to keep their kid in a bubble and protect them, and the kid who keeps pushing out and pushing out and pushing out. And finally, the parent realizes that like the pushing out and the getting out of the bubble is really the thing that's going to save them. That's going to be good for them, not the like protecting them all the time. So yeah, I can't remember what your question was, but it was that was the sort of the process, the writing process of it, how it evolved to being this young woman, and I remember when Zika was happening, and I thought like that's what a strange phenomenon. I hadn't remembered when there was sort of one gender that was more susceptible to a certain disease, and I had never, and I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting, and started to use that. And science fiction stories are really a favorite of mine, and so they kind of find their way into a lot of the things that I do, even if they just start out as a kind of straight drama. Very often I find myself daydreaming about how can this be a science fiction movie too. And so this movie I think could have been done in a more traditional or conventional like post-apocalyptic world, and it almost would have been the same thing sort of. But instead I tried to find something that hadn't been done yet, instead of just nuclear apocalypse or you know, natural disasters everywhere or something. Try to find something that felt a little bit more like of this world and real and something that we sort of experience, but just on a much, much, much bigger scale. And that's where how I wound up with this kind of disease.
And is that why you decided to collaborate with Elizabeth Moss, who's done Handmaid's Tale, which is also this very scary, vision of the world where women are still there but quite invisible? I think you had only one day to shoot those scenes together. Am I right?
I know. She and I have worked together before, and I actually hadn't seen Handmaid's Tale. I'm not even sure if it had come out when I was casting this movie. This was 3 years ago, I guess. I don't know how many seasons there have been, but I didn't even know that she was in that, really. It just wasn't on my radar. But she and I did a movie. She had one day on The Old Man and the Gun. And so I got to know her, and I thought she was fantastic. It's really hard to come in for one day on anything and work because everybody else is comfortable. You're brand new. It's your first day. You feel uncomfortable in your costume and your weird hair, and you just feel so stiff. It's the worst. And she came in, and she was great on the first day. And I knew that the part of this mother needed someone who could just come in and be great. And she was amazing. We had one day that we shot together, and she did, 10 different scenes. There was a lot of stuff that wasn't in there, and she could just jump into it and do it all. And we had gotten along on Old Man and the Gun, and so when I asked her to come do this, she was nice enough to do it. Obviously, she didn't have to. She's a big star and everything, but she was kind enough to do it.
And you mentioning this film, Old Man and the Gun, you've been collaborated with David Lowery for a while now. And last time you've been here, you were talking about A Ghost Story, which is quite an unusual film, I would say. So those collaborations that, for example, like with David or even Gus Van Sant, when you managed to, do more than just one film together, do you think you learned something while doing that, or maybe there was just some other directors that kind of made you think about doing it yourself?
Well, I definitely learned a lot from all those people, from David Lowery, from Gus Van Sant, from people that I've worked with more than once. And I learned a lot from people I worked with just once, too. But you get a nice, easy relationship after doing a movie once where it feels like you have this whole relationship. It's kind of like going out with someone. You meet them, you go out with them, you break up. The next time around, the relationship is so much easier, and then the third time around, it's even easier, and you have a shorthand, you share a language that you can sort of talk about behavior and scenes and stuff, and so, and those are both great directors, and Kenny Lonergan I've worked with a couple times, so they're all just very, very talented in different ways, and I was able to kind of steal things from them and learn from them, and I've just been really fortunate that way. So when I came to do this movie, I felt like I had a kind of a long, free education in making movies because I got to know all these great directors and kind of study them up close.
And Anna, I asked you when we just first met today that was it hard to play Rank because she changes so much throughout the film. So how did you see her at the beginning, and maybe how did you see her just finding her own way and just taking kind of control, really? I hope we're not spoiling the movie for anybody. I'm just trying to be as cryptic as I can.
The thing is, when you are playing a character, or at least I don't know about other actors, I try to see myself as the character. So I try to put like myself and my kind of characteristics into the character. But at first, when I got the audition and I got some of the info, I thought she was basically like any kind of preteen towards their father, kind of a little gets aggravated easily by her father.
Not easily impressed by his stories.
Yeah, and a bookworm. But like I said before, when you put yourself, as the character, you kind of just base it off of like how you would be if that was your life. Like when I went in every day to set, I would just think to myself, like, this is real, like this is happening, and that's how I kind of played it. So as, you know, we filmed more, I did that. You know, I'd say, okay, how would I be in this situation?
And Casey, you mentioned Kenneth Lonergan a while ago, but you actually shot this film while you were doing promotion for Manchester by the Sea. Is that right?
Yes.
How did you even manage to do that?
It was a mistake because it was because making a movie requires all of your attention and energy, and I just didn't know that I would still be promoting Manchester by the Sea by the time we were shooting. So we tried to push this movie, push it farther and farther, but I really wanted snow in the movie, and so we were butting up against like springtime. We got lucky and we got a bunch of snow, but it was, I would have been disappointed if we had shown up in the part of the movie that was supposed to look totally different from the other parts and it looked the same. That would have sucked. So, but yeah, I was just sort of going back and forth, but the movie was a priority and doing the publicity was secondary.
And this is your second film after I'm Still Here, and I remember seeing it in Venice and people being still convinced that it was actually a documentary and the whole thing was true.
Yes.
I'm just going to remind that I'm Still Here is about a mockumentary about Joaquin Phoenix supposedly quitting acting to become a hip-hop star, I guess. Yep. So that didn't work out, I think. It's a shame. Would you mind talking about that film a bit, and you know, what did you learn, and maybe, you know, just how different was this time for you as a director, because of course it's a different story.
Yeah, that movie, you know, I liked Andy Kaufman a lot, and I really and I sort of was thinking about making something. Also, I was thinking about the way that how people are watching different things now, you know, and I was lucky enough, probably like most of us here, to grow up where there was no internet and there was no YouTube, and then suddenly there was. And to see that huge change, you know, it's pretty special. Like there won't be that kind of big of a shift for a while again. But one of the things that I was struck by was how incredibly captivating real footage is. Footage of just like a kitten playing or someone just falling down the stairs. Something that is real is, to me, is way more interesting than 99% of the stuff that you see that at the time was being made and carefully constructed and in a more like conventional movie making kind of a way. And I wanted a movie to have that feeling. And I remember when I saw Blair Witch, I was lucky enough to see it in someone was having a dinner party, and they said, "Have you seen that found footage stuff about those kids who got killed?" And they had set me up completely, and I fell for it. And I sat there and watched it, and I was terrified. And I thought that it was all real until I got to the end, and there were all these credits. And I'll never forget that. And I really wanted to do something that had that impact on an audience. And so we started doing this thing that, you know, I was determined to make it feel as real as possible. And I knew that I would have to have sort of documentary style footage to tell the story and have it feel that way, to have this sort of embarrassment of all those situations feel that way. And then I saw this movie about a real documentary about a filmmaker who was he behaved so terribly. He was so mean to everybody around him that in the movie, he sort of loses all of his friends, and then the people making the documentary about him turn on him too, and they release this documentary that's very unflattering of him. And so those were the ingredients. It was like Blair Witch, that documentary, a couple other things, Borat, and we thought, okay, that's a recipe for something interesting. Let's see what happens. And, you know, it's a very strange movie, and I think that people were sort of annoyed by it mostly. They thought it was arrogant to think that we could fool anybody, yet they also, I don't know, they didn't like being told one thing and having been something else. So I think it mostly just sort of made everybody mad at us. And then more people were mad at us than even saw the movie. So So it was like a double failure. But and then I thought, well, I'm not going to do that again because it certainly was kind of a bad experience. But in the end, but then, so I wanted to do something that was the opposite end of the spectrum, just very conventional, sort of classical movie making. And I thought about Sidney Lumet and who's a favorite, and very often just had static shots. He would make whole beautiful movies and not move the camera that much. And that was what I wanted to do in this movie a little bit, because it was just visually totally different than that. Then I'm Still Here, and then and also Tarkovsky, who I liked a lot, and so that became the inspiration. That was the inspiration. The first was the inspiration for that, and this one is sort of things like Gene Dealman, which I showed to the financier in pre-production. I said, so I'm kind of thinking of something like this, which is a 4-hour, complete naturalistic. For most people, a total snooze.
They loved it, I'm sure.
Yes, they were horrified, and they almost pulled the plug. And so I said, okay, I won't do that. And then I kind of did it anyway, a little bit. So your question was, how did the one lead to the other? And with I'm Still Here, it was, one kind of a movie, and in this I wanted to do something totally different. So I wrote a screenplay, and I tried to conceive of it in a very classical way and execute it that way.
But yeah, you mentioned this film by Chantal Akerman, but I've also heard somewhere that you liked Ida by Paweł Pawlikowski for those shots. And would you mind saying what it is that you liked? Just it being very, very still.
Yeah, very still and beautiful. The cinematography is beautiful. And also, I felt like, in some way, I was still going after that feeling of, how can you get an audience to sit in the theater and just lose themselves, and to actually just for 1 second feel like they're watching real behavior, because there's so much artifice. Everyone knows how to make a movie in that old-fashioned, in that way. Everyone knows. You have a movie-making app on your phone. Everyone can cut and cover a scene, and so what can you do to sort of sweep all that clutter away and just let an audience sort of believe that for a second they're watching behavior? And with Ida, and maybe with Light of My Life, it's to let the camera be still and let people move in and out of frame as if it's a sort of voyeuristic shot. And the camera's just been put down there, and everyone walked away. Mm-hmm. The crew walked away, and you're just sort of watching people kind of move in and out of frame, which is why in the movie you see me kind of hover on the edge of the frame. Sometimes my head is cut off a little bit, or sometimes, one of the early shots, you see the both of us at the bottom of the frame, and our torsos are kind of cut off. It looks like we're not standing on our marks, or some accident has been made. And I think that sometimes, at least subconsciously, that makes people just sort of sit up a little bit and pay attention if they think some accident has happened. And I knew that I was going to have to sort of wake people up a little bit in this movie.
And from the very beginning, you two seem so comfortable together and so intimate. There's just this bond that you needed this bond, I guess, for this film to function. So how did you work on creating that? Because I can imagine that there was not a lot of time, especially given that you were doing the Manchester by the Sea promotion tour as well.
I mean, I wish we did something special or magical. She was just awesome. She sort of came in and understood what was required, which was to be able to relate to the other person in the scene. She was just a professional actor and was like, okay, this guy's playing my dad, and I'm playing his daughter, and I have a dad of my own, and how do I relate to my own dad? And she kind of did her homework. She did all the work. She prepared herself really well. So there wasn't any trickery involved. I think she just is good.
Also, Casey is for some reason, he's just so easy to be around, and so easy to be vulnerable with. And like I've said before, when you're filming, for it to be realistic, you have to be vulnerable. You have to show everything. And it was just, it kind of, clicked with Casey.
And once when you were discussing To Die For, which was really your breakthrough role, I think, you mentioned something that everybody is good in Gus Van Sant movie. And then because he cares about casting a lot, and then he just uses what people can give him. I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit more about it, and is it something that you're trying to do yourself?
I wish I could do that. Gus has a very good eye for like figuring out. He sort of can understand what quality in the character is going to make the movie work the best. So he's not casting people based on like how well they read this line, or how do they look like this or look like that. He hasn't said this, and I'm mostly guessing, but he seems to cast people based on kind of their one essential quality, and then he lets the rest just kind of live. And he has said that, I would say like, Gus, why don't you give me any direction? And he says like, well, I made the choice to cast you because I want you to do what you're going to do. And, I think it's smart because there's only so much you can sort of manipulate people in the scene. They're basically they have a certain like sphere of what they're capable of, and they're going to do that. And then, but it's also really smart because it makes the actors feel like it's their ideas that are in the movie, their ideas that are kind of, they're invested more, and they bring a certain energy and spark to whatever they're doing because they're not just a puppet. It's sort of their idea and their performance that's out there. And so I think that's why his movies have so much life. Those characters like My Own Private Idaho or Drugstore Cowboy, they have just a kind of a fire in them, that is a light in them that is hard, that just doesn't dim over time when you revisit the movie and watch it over and over again. They really feel like real people and you care about them.
And you said once that you actually, like, your favorite part of the process is to talk about the film, not to the journalist, of course, like me, no, nobody likes that, but to people on set, I imagine, or to other actors. So did you actually had those long conversations about maybe just where to take the story and where to go with those people?
I actually like talking to journalists about movies. You spend so much time making a movie, and then usually you kind of show it a couple times, and the audience coughs a little bit, and some people walk out, and then they clap at the end, and it's kind of anticlimactic. And so if there are journalists that are actually willing to watch your movie and talk about it in a kind of sensitive way, it's the best thing in the world. So thank you, and I'm happy to talk about it. But as for like preparation with a movie, the best thing for me is to listen to the director talk about a scene, and just have it be kind of a one-way street a little bit. Just try to absorb all of their ideas, and then they sort of sit inside you, and then you see what comes out afterward. So I tried to do that with Anna. I think I lectured her quite a bit, and I'm sure sometimes I was on set and I could hear my voice just droning on, and I'm seeing her eyes glaze over. And I was like, okay, this is too much. But it helped the relationship, I think, on screen, because I was watching the movie today thinking like, oh my God, this is so tedious. This parent is like, just every scene after scene after scene of my character just talking and explaining things in the most annoying way. And
father-splaining.
Yes, father-splaining, everything. And it's good because it is what the movie is, I guess. But it's certainly tedious, and I felt that I must have been sometimes that way with you.
It wasn't bad, though. I mean, that's basically what our relationship is like in the movie. So it's good to kind of have that real life factor. And I remember before filming, Casey had me read 3 long books. I forget what they were. One of them was Little House on the Prairies. I read them. I wasn't sure why, because I don't think it came back. But, I did it anyway, so. But, I think the whole kind of lectures that he gave me on set, it really factored in the film.
Little House on the Prairie. What were you thinking?
I have no idea.
Exactly.
I can't remember doing that. I may have just needed a couple days off from rehearsal and just told her to go read some books. What were the other ones?
I forget the other ones.
Okay.
Yeah. They were long.
They were, yes, Anna Karenina and no. Yeah.
And I just wanted to maybe ask one more thing about this collaboration that you've been having with Gus Van Sant, because he directed one film that you actually co-written with Matt Damon, Jerry, and you also edited it, if I remember correctly. So you basically tried to really help him out this time. And there is this scene, even though it's mostly silent, there's this one scene when you just sit by the fireplace and you just talk about video game and conquering cities and whatnot. Yeah. So is it something that you like, those dialogues that also made it all the way here?
Yeah. Yes, that's another sort of long, tedious scene. I do like that. I like telling stories in a scene. But that movie, what happened with that movie was that Matt and I wrote the script, and then we decided as we started to shoot the movie, or Gus decided, it was his idea, that we would play the scene through several times, and then we'd do a silent version of the scene. We would just, same blocking, same camera moves, and we wouldn't speak. Nobody would say anything, which is a little bit different than doing a silent movie, because the two actors have been saying the words over and over, that in some way they're thinking it. They're in sync in the scene instead of thinking randomly about other stuff. And so he ended up using a lot of those scenes, maybe because when Matt and I were talking, it wasn't any good. But and so he ends up, so that movie was pretty silent. There were a lot of scenes with no dialogue. And then when we got to this one scene where this is a movie about two people lost in the desert, and the first night that they spend out there, he wanted it to seem like they were oblivious to the danger that they were in. And so we had, I just sit down and we're talking about a video game. It's like the most inconsequential thing, sort of totally out of touch with the kind of what's about to happen to us in the movie, which is that we're going to never find our way and one of us is going to die. And so I just, prattle on and on about like a video game. And I don't know, Gus's movies are very often about innocence and the loss of innocence, and I think that in that movie, that was a moment of innocence before innocence is lost.
And that was the film that earned you your first leading role in Lonesome Jim. Steve Buscemi really loved it, I've heard. So how was that, to be given, the chance to just kind of tell your own story? Because Lonesome Jim is just about your character, pretty much.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, that saying there are no small parts, only small actors is mostly true, but there are small parts. And so it was great to get to do a bigger part where you can explore sort of more nuance of a character over the course of the movie. You can show them be many different things. How are they sad? How are they mad? How are they happy? Watch them get things and then lose things and get them back. And that you can't do with smaller supporting parts. And Steve was just, I love him to death. He was really a wonderful, supportive director, and he gave me that chance to play that part. And I was happy about it.
And then I wanted to ask you, because your character in the film, she's not allowed to be who she is in so many ways. So how did it make you think of what it really means to be a girl or a woman? There's a scene when she's finding a magazine, and there are all those wisdoms shared, like that, a woman is like, her legs are supposed to be half her body. I think that was the line. So how did you think about her? Because she's still herself. It's just that she cannot show it, but she tries sometimes. She finds those clothes. She plays around with what it means to be a woman. I'm just curious to hear what you thought about that.
Well, what I think was a big factor in that is that Rag grew up, without any woman figure in her life. She only had her dad, She never had that kind of role model of who to be. And I know myself, I always try to be like my mom.
Who is with us, I think.
Right there. Love you. But, Rag doesn't have that. So I think... I think that she kind of looks for those things that she's supposed to be, like, this tall and her legs this long and, hair that long. But, some things she just doesn't get to have. For example, the clothes or long hair. And the long hair was real for me, so that helped. I had long hair and chopped it all off. But I think what's most important is that she never really had that role model growing up. So she looked for things that made her kind of give her clues of what a woman is.
And you have a little girl as well, I think. So how are you trying to I don't want to repeat the title of the book in the film, but how are you trying to make her a strong woman, so to speak?
Yeah. I have 2 boys. I have 2 nieces. And when I changed this part to being, as I said, being about a girl, I sort of based it on them, and it was fun to think about. Okay, what if I had a girl? How would that change parenting, and does it make a difference? All those sorts of things. Of course, it doesn't. And you know, that magazine thing was. I just have always despised those like beauty magazines. I just have always hated the way that they sort of perpetuate ideas about sort of very, very narrow ideas about beauty for women and for men, for everybody. It's just and so that was me sort of just venting a little bit in the movie, I think, sort of sneaking in a little scene that was kind of irrelevant to the rest of the movie, but I just wanted to be able to say those things. And, you know, I think that they're hurtful and they're backward and they're like, is that tragically old-fashioned, and so that's what that scene was kind of about. And also that was like having 2 little kids who have famous people in their families. I've had to have a lot of conversations about, you know, they walk down the grocery store aisle and they see, you know, their uncle on the cover of a magazine or something, and it says something that's a lie about him, and I would have to sort of correct them and sit down and say, these magazines are full of lies, you know, and sort of, so some of the dialogue that's in the movie is dialogue that's come right out of my mouth, sort of talking to my own kids about how to deal with that aspect of their life.
Like when she says that some stories are made up at the very beginning of the film. Mm-hmm. And you had some great women working on the film. I'm thinking about your editor, for example, that worked with you on I'm Still Here also, I think, right?
Yes, Dodie Dorn is, she's fantastic. She's been around forever and she's cut lots of really good movies, much better movies than the ones that she's made with me, Ridley Scott movies, and I mean a lot of them. And so she really knows what she's doing. She's great. I had all these people on this movie to sort of lift it up and help me make it, who have really had no business doing a tiny little movie like this. The first AD who worked on all of the like Lord of the Rings movies and The Hobbit, like these gigantic productions, like huge $200 million movies, and she was willing to come and do this like teeny tiny little $5 million movie out in the woods. You know, just really lucky, and without them, and I wouldn't have been able to make the movie. And Adam Arkapaw was our cinematographer who shot True Detective, the first season True Detective, and he was great. So we had a lot of help, Anna and I.
And I just wanted to see if we have already some questions. Yes. So maybe we can ask 2, and then again at the very end. Do we have a mic already or not? Yes? So we have some at the front. They're raising their hands.
Nick Holdsworth from the Hollywood Reporter. Question for you, Casey. You're known as somebody who supports environmental concerns. You're a vegan. You're against Trump. You've been on the record about that. How important do you think it is that such a film as this can help raise awareness about the real challenges that we face in the world today?
You're giving a film like this a lot of credit that I'm not sure it deserves. I certainly hope that it would raise awareness about sort of, I don't know. I mean, I'm not quite that ambitious or arrogant enough to think that it could, but I do really believe in the power of art, and like especially in times like this, that people are sort of keep making things, keep telling stories, and keep trying to weather their political in nature or not, I think it just, it provokes healthy conversation and it brings people together. I wouldn't claim that it would help make the world a better place, but the concerns that you attribute to me are real. I do care about the environment, and there are lots of social issues that matter to me that maybe gleaned a little bit in the movie here and there. Definitely in the more obvious ones, and the conversations that he has to have with his daughter about the sort of racist remarks that are made by the guy or sexist remarks that are made by the guy in town. And the sort of, in the explaining of that, I think that it's very simplistic, obviously, because he's talking to not just someone who's a kid, not that kids can't handle complex explanations, they can, but it's the first time some of those ideas have been mentioned to his kid, and so he's doing it in a foundational kind of simple way, but sometimes even those sorts of simple explanations are good to hear again. Even the choir needs practice. So, but other than that, I'm not sure that it does anything other than sort of entertain for a little while, if that.
I may have a follow-up to that, because it's not about just about explaining the world to your child, but explaining the ugly. So how did you work on those scenes when you have to have those awkward conversations or unpleasant ones? How did you approach them?
I think the reason that it looks actually really awkward is because it was actually really awkward to film. Yeah, very awkward.
That's hilarious. I didn't. I was. It didn't feel so awkward. Anna's a pro, and she's also a very mature, intelligent young person. So nothing was being said that hasn't been said. And her parents are there, and they're great parents, and they had these things. I mean, those are the conversations I started having with my kids when they were 3. You know what I mean? So just so that they wouldn't be awkward, I had them very, very early on. So by the time they got to 10, 11, and 12, they'd heard those things a million times. The idea in this scene was that he hadn't done that really so much, so he's trying to explain things in a way that is very, very, more awkward for him, but for her, it's stuff that she has already discovered the whole world through these books and their trips to the library, and that's the first time that he realizes that, or one of the times in the movie that he realizes that she has a whole inner life that isn't about them, isn't about him as a parent, that it's from what she's gotten out of the world and books and her own experiences and the things that she came into the world with. And he's starting to learn that no amount of lecturing or protecting or guiding is going to lead her in the path that he wants. She's going to have her own path and she'll be fine. So it wasn't so awkward for me, really. I don't remember, but I'm glad it was awkward for her. I guess it worked.
It worked.
And how many of those were completely scripted, or did you allow yourself some freedom when having those conversations in the film?
They were scripted because I knew that I wanted to have sustained shots that just didn't cut too much. Mm-hmm. And very often, if you don't script something, it tends to be take a lot longer, like the way I'm talking now. There's a lot of ums and ahs, and I didn't want that because then the movie would have been 17 hours. So I just scripted it and memorized it and delivered it.
Yeah, hi, Harry from Finland over here. This may be a theoretical question, but how would the world of your movie be different if the virus wiped out the men instead of women?
That's really funny. There's a movie that David Lowery and I had talked about a mining town where all the men were in the mine, and the mine had a terrible accident and they all died. And it was a period movie, and so this whole town, only the women are left. And I can't wait to see that movie when he makes it. And that might answer your question a little bit. But I would say that it would be, equally unbalanced, I suppose. Unbalanced, but probably, one thing that came to mind while I was making this and wondering those kinds of things was that it would be less violent. And the violence in the movie is something that he's always just trying to keep at bay, because he's scared of it, and but because he's aware of that it exists in the world, you know, and it's always the men that sort of, whenever these men appear, then that's when the violence happens again. I read a short story by a woman named, she's so good. It's called In the Land of Men, and it was about a woman and her 4 brothers, and how they deal with a certain situation differently, and they have all these violent solutions. And it's about her trying to navigate like a world of violence, kind of. So that was one thing I was thinking about, but I really did not set out to make a movie that was making a point about like gender or anything like that at all. It really was for me just about a sort of father-child, and once it became a father-daughter, that factored into it somehow. But I had no agenda otherwise.
And I noticed that whenever somebody asks you about the films that have shaped you in some way, you usually mention Elephant Man, but also The Harder They Come, which is just maybe, it's a film, Jamaican film that basically introduced reggae to the world. Why was it so special? Was it the first film that you've actually seen in the cinema also?
Yeah, it was. I think that those movies are just like anything else in life. There were experiences that happened to me and at an early age, and so they made a very indelible impression. And then when I grew up and started making movies of my own, those were the experiences that came back to me, you know, about what a movie was. I saw Elephant Man in my dad's apartment on a black and white TV, and I was probably 6, 7 years old, and it was terrifying and heartbreaking. And so, you know, I was just too young to take that in without any conversation from grown-ups or anything. It was just this like private experience that I had watching this thing, and it lived in my mind as my own. Like, I didn't know anyone else that had seen The Elephant Man. That wasn't something you go to 2nd grade and talk about. So it was just something that like lived inside of me, and it was. And then I saw The Harder They Come, which was a movie starring Jimmy Cliff. That was set in Jamaica. I was also too young to see, and I went to a woman who was taking care of me, who was a neighbor. She took me and her son, who were, I don't know, we were like 8 or 9 or something, into a movie theater, and it was full of people like smoking cigarettes, smoking marijuana, talking back at the theater, yelling at the theater screen, and it was a very rowdy crowd. And I remember just that experience, every part of it, because it was so strange and alien to me. But I also remember the movie. So both of those are movies I've watched a lot. Sometimes I realize when I'm telling a story that I'm telling the story of one of those people, of the Elephant Man or of Jimmy Cliff in that movie. You just don't even realize it. You think you have all these original ideas, but they're just things that, you know, you've taken in from your childhood or whatever.
And we already covered the books, and let's not go back there. But did you actually discuss any of the films for this one, or maybe did you discover some on your own?
Not that I can remember. You know, I don't really. It was kind of a long time ago. I don't remember discussing, or maybe we've talked about one movie. I don't know. But the thing about this movie, it's. I think it's really out there, you know. It's unique and different. So, it's like there are some movies that kind of have the same background, but I think that the character and their relationship makes it different, you know.
Do we have other questions? Yes. Do we have a mic? Yeah.
Hi, Casey. You've been involved in the independent film industry as an actor, writer, director, and producer for over 30 years now. How has it changed over that time, and what are the particular challenges facing independent cinema right now?
Minor correction. I'm only 43, so maybe like 25 years. You know, I've like basically been, you're right, like in the independent movie space, because studios never wanted to put me in their movies, more or less. I mean, there's definitely a time when I would have taken any job that was given to me, and there's a time when I did, and there's a lot of them on my resume that I wish weren't there. And but then there was the time when I had the choice of choosing the movies that I wanted to do. And those movies, some of them turned out not so well either, but like at least there were things that I wanted to do and I thought would be good when I set out doing them. But the answer to your question is that I remember when I started doing To Die For, and Gus Van Sant made Drugstore Cowboy, I think, in 1989, and that was the year that there was like Spike Lee had Do the Right Thing, I think, and Gus had Drugstore Cowboy, and Steven Soderbergh had help me out, was Sex, Lies, and Videotape. And it was like an explosion of independent movies. The Sundance Film Festival kicked off, and it was just a brand new world of like you could make all this new stuff. And then by the time that I got to work with Gus, people were already saying, so independent movies are dying, like what's going to happen next? That was 1992 or whatever, 1991. And I remember him saying like, that's not going to happen, you know. And I think he was right. And people still say that. They say independent movies are dying. And, you know, silent movies did die. You know what I mean? Like, it does happen. I'm sure for a while people were saying this is the death of silent movies now that there are talkies. And they were right. They kind of died off. But I think for the time being, people are still making independent movies because there's a lot of people who grew up watching movies and they want to tell stories visually, even if they're just on Snapchat or on Instagram or whatever the future of like an independent movie is going to be, which is just one person's idea of a story they want to tell that isn't diluted by making every decision by committee and making sure that those decisions support a financially successful outcome. That will continue on, I think, forever in whatever form. I'm sure that movies are going to change now because my kids don't even want to go to movies. They just watch stuff on social media and on YouTube or whatever. And I kind of do too. Like they show me stuff and it's 15 minutes and it's amazing. And I kind of think like, well, we could watch a couple of those or we could like schlep down to the movie theater. And it's hard to make myself go out and do that and support movies because I do want to support movies. And the experience of showing a movie in a theater is way different and I love it. I love watching it with an audience and feeling other people. I was sitting in the theater today and at times loving it and at times hating it and feeling horrible about the, you know, the room. But like that's what makes it great, and I want to be able to do that forever. And this movie was definitely made. It was hubris for sure, but it was made to be shown in a theater, not on a phone. Because on a phone, no one is going to watch this movie. You know what I mean? It's too slow. The images are too wide. It's not going to hold anybody's attention. They're just going to like go to the next thing. They're going to like swipe left or whatever. So in a theater, you have a captive audience. For most of the time, some people walk out, but you have a captive audience. They're not going to change the channel. They're going to watch it, and that I hope will last for a long time. It's at least as long as I'm still working, and independent movies I think will be around too. And there's so many young filmmakers now that are making stuff that is just awesome, and it's totally different. And I think they're going to look back on like the last 10 years as maybe being a kind of have there having been better times in movies and independent movies, and the new wave of filmmakers who are now like 18, 19, 20, those kids are making just great stuff, and there's going to be a huge upswing, and we're going to have all kinds of movies from around the world, movies that are kind of like looking at different cultures and from the inside out, you know, because the process of making movies is totally demystified for everybody. Everyone has access to the technology. Everyone knows how to do it. And so now you get to see not just the kind of privileged few who got to go to film school, but just the ordinary person on the street. In the way that like, and then I'll shut up, in the way that like hip hop started by people who didn't know how to play instruments because they didn't have parents who would buy them instruments and teach them. They just took a record and started like literally scratching on it and made their own music. Now you'll see that with movies where people are like, I don't really care about how you think I'm supposed to make a movie. I'm going to use my phone and make whatever movie I want. And then we're going to see some great stuff.
I mean, Werner Herzog recently told me the only thing he watches are crazy cat videos, so we might be doomed at this point.
He's lost his mind.
Do we have more questions? Yes.
Hello, Casey Affleck. I have two questions. One, did you choose the books about education randomly, or are they also favorite books how to raise your children in your real life? Because those two books are actually those we have in our libraries with my wife, and they are very important for us. And the second question, you have many references of Christian and biblical references in your film. So how did you work with this layer?
Oh, those are great questions. Thanks. I chose those books just by like reading them and seeing which I thought were the most interesting, and also which had sort of the best titles. You know, there were some that we couldn't get rights to. One which I loved, called by Betsy Brown or whatever, who she wrote a book called "Just Tell Me What to Say," which is about like parenting, like when you just like your kid asks you a question and you're like, I don't need to know like how to be perfect or the thought process behind it. Like, just tell me, how am I supposed to answer the question about like, you know, earthquakes or whatever. Like, there were other books that I wanted to use and I couldn't, and but those are some of the ones that I liked and I wanted to use, and they're great. And then the biblical stuff, you know, it wasn't such a big part of the script, and it became a little bit more in the movie. The actor playing Tom really was into that more, so he was, you know, we had the idea that he would be reading the Bible sort of out loud to the other two guys. You know, we thought a little bit about like what was the world going to be like in this situation, and part of the answer was it might be like prison culture a little bit, where you know, what's life like in prison, and so there's a lot of faith in prison. People look to faith, and kind of terrible times. People tend to be drawn more to spirituality a little bit, and so that was how that found its way in there.
We still have time, I think, for 2 more questions. Do we have? Just raise your hand, and we're going to find you. Yes. Oh, hello.
Hi, I'm here from Tel Aviv. Question both of you, what's next for you? Are you planning to direct a new film? And where do you keep your Oscar?
Where do you keep your Oscar?
You know, I do have a few, so I have a room for it. No, I think that maybe was for you. Yes. I'm not sure.
I don't know what Anna's doing next. She can say, but it's going to be good. I'm doing a movie with Mona Fastvolt, who's a Norwegian director. She's great, and it's called The World to Come. It's about 2 women on a farm in the 19th century who have both lost someone, and they sort of fall in love. It's a 4-character movie, and there's myself and Jesse Plemons are the husbands, and Catherine Waterston and Vanessa Kirby are the wives. And it's a really exceptionally beautiful script written by the guy who wrote The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. His name's Ron Hansen, and it's just one of the best scripts I've ever read, and I'm really looking forward to it. We'll shoot it in Romania pretty soon. Oh, the Oscar is in my closet, right? It's in our closet, I'm afraid to say. Yeah.
And Casey, actually, what are your memories of this wonderful film, The Assassination of Jesse James by coward Robert Ford? Because it was a wonderful performance, and I remember that you mentioned many times that you would like to collaborate with Andrew Dominik again.
Yeah, I love talking about that movie. But wait, I didn't hear what Anna was about. What is she working on next? I'm dying to know.
Oh, you know, I'm lined up for a few things. There's a 2nd season of a show that I'm in coming up, Pen 15 on Hulu.
What is it called?
Pen 15.
Pen 15.
Yeah. You know, just kind of rolling. See what happens.
Yep, high school.
Yeah, high school.
Jesse James is, Andrew Dominik is one of the great filmmakers. It's a shame that he doesn't work more. That he's definitely stuck in that like independent film the current challenges of independent film, which are that it has gotten less expensive to make, and so people want you to make those sort of stories that aren't like, you know, the Avengers or whatever. They want you to make them for even less, because there's so much content out there that it just all gets made for less. And he's someone who like has really good taste, and he wants to make things, but he also is not making conventional studio movies. So he's working on a movie about Marilyn Monroe, which is a fantastic script that he wrote. That movie, that was kind of the first studio movie. Anytime any studio wanted to put me in a movie, and you know, I was kind of the lead of the movie, and Brad was sort of the supporting part of the movie, which everyone thought was so preposterous that when they saw the like first cut of the movie, which was about 3 hours and 15 minutes, and Brad dies at like 2 hours and 28 minutes, they were like, well, that's where the movie should end. They were like, no one wants to watch the movie after Brad Pitt dies. What exactly are we thinking? But that was the story that had to be told, and so the movie carries on after Jesse James dies, and then it's just me, and so it got a little bit shorter, considerably shorter, but still, it was an experience like none other, because Andrew is somebody, he's one of the directors who is like, has a strange gift, like a real actual genius. It's a word that's overused, but for making actors better and making everybody better. You know, Roger Deakins shot that movie, and he said that it's one of his best work ever. And Andrew had only made one movie, so you know, and Roger Deakins had made 30 movies or 50 movies or something. So Andrew's just one of those people that lifts everybody up and makes them great. It's the kind of thing I hope I can do one day, but certainly it's far down the road.
Thank you both so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.